So I think we're still in Daniel 10 through 12. We're still on the, we're gonna pick up sometime today on the outline I sent out last night. If you didn't get the outline I sent out last night, it's in your email. But we're going to finish with notes on Daniel's last vision, the kind of long one that we've been going through.
Page 4.
Are we on page 4? Thanks, Don. Don is good on keeping us up to date. So I think I had gone through actually the verses regarding what I thought were maybe regarding Herod versus chapter 11, 36 through 39. I think we had gone through those. I didn't read any of the long quotes that I have on this outline, and I can leave those for you to do. But I was wondering if it would be helpful to go back through the evidence for perhaps Herod being the king being spoken of there. Would that be helpful for people? Or do we want to move ahead into verse 40?
Yeah, I think that'd be helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, I do too.
All right.
Find my notes.
Okay, so we're going to start in 1136. So you'll remember all the way up through 35. It was pretty clear to all the interpreters. In fact, clear to all the interpreters. It was a historical chronological account given in advance by the Holy Spirit through Daniel. And that it's a historical account, like I said, that just goes chronologically from the Persian period all the way through. When we get to Antiochus IV, we're at about 164 BC. And we get to Antiochus IV, the times of the Maccabees, and then after them the Hasmoneans. And the Hasmoneans period picks up in verse 35. Some of the wise will stumble, so that they may be refined, purified, and made spotless until the time of the end, for it will still come at the appointed time. Most scholars, most interpreters believe this is about the Hasmonean period, the period following upon the Maccabean period. The Hasmoneans would be kind of the priestly caste. And it says some of the wise will stumble so that they may be refined, purified, and made spotless until the time of the end. And this is about the stumbling and the falling part. Actually, if we read a little bit before that, verse 34, when they fall, they will receive a little help, and many who are not sincere will join them. This was at the end of the Maccabean period when insincere Jews joined with the Maccabean Jews who were fighting against Antiochus IV. And they actually, the armies of the Maccabees actually defeated these Syrian armies, and Antiochus was then turned away. But there were false members among the Jewish rebels who caused problems and splits and things like that in there. Then, so depending on when verse 35 is talking about, we have, if it's the Hasmonean period, which is what most people think, then that goes all the way through about 31 BC. So if it's just the Maccabean period that's being spoken of, it ends about 160 BC. So on a timeline, that's where we would be. Then we get to verse 36, the king will do as he pleases. And this is where we have the division over different interpretations. Did I tell you guys Don's illustration of the ants? Okay, really good illustration of ants. So Don and I were talking about something else, and he mentioned this, how when you see a line of ants, they're all marching in a line, right? Until they encounter a block. If you put a block in the middle of the line, you put a pebble down there or something, the ants go in a straight line all the way in single file or in a file like that until they get to the block, and then they just go everywhere. And this is kind of analogous to what's happening with the interpretation of Daniel 1 through 35. All the commentators are just pretty much in a straight line, and they get to verse 36, and there's a problem, a block in the road, and everybody goes everywhere. Just, just all kinds of things get suggested. So I thought it was a really good illustration and applies a lot of times to situations in the Bible like this. So verse 36, the king will do as he pleases. We said that means he will be successful in his undertakings. And Herod certainly was successful in everything he did. In fact, his reign was characterized, or his life was characterized by being successful. He will exalt and magnify himself above every god and will say unheard of things against the God of gods. So I'm reading from the NIV right now. He will be successful until the time of wrath is completed, for what has been determined must take place. So he will exalt, back at the beginning of 36, he will exalt and magnify himself above every god and will say unheard of things against the God of gods. There's two ways to understand the word God in the first part of this. He will exalt and magnify himself above every god. One way is God is God, or things that are thought of as God, like pagan gods and things like that. Another way is the Bible often uses the word God, or El, which is translated God, to refer to human rulers. And you have Jesus referring to that. You've all heard that passage in the Gospel of John where Jesus says, quoting Psalm 82, he says, I have said you are gods, yet you will die like mere men. And then he says, if God called them gods, meaning the rulers of Israel, how can you accuse me of blasphemy when I say I'm the Son of God? So the word God has this idea, or the word El has this idea of rulership. It's most often used of gods or God in the Bible, but sometimes also used of rulers. Keeping that in mind, Herod rose to be the king of Judea, obviously exalting himself above all others, and he used all others as kind of a stepping stone to get there. He was very, like I said last time, he was very politically savvy, was able to play, see where the power lay, and ingratiate himself to the people in power, make promises and commitments, and then he would be rewarded when he came through on those things with more power, and eventually he became exalted over all people as the king in Judea. Talking about other gods, though, if we're talking about gods and the God of gods, Herod is very clear, lived just for himself and for his own power. In fact, one of the sources that I quoted in the outline, let's see if I can find it. Oh, so if you go to page 6 and look at the last line that's indented, the last sentence that's indented, or the second to the last sentence. He was the incarnation of brute lust, which in turn became the burden of the lives of his children. History tells us of few more immoral families than the house of Herod. Anyway, lust was not sexual lust, but lust for power with Herod, the incarnation of the lust for power. The only thing that he served was this lust for power. So he did not serve any of the gods, not even the Roman ones, which he pretended to serve by building them temples, building them, putting up Roman statues, he actually put a statue of an eagle, a large golden statue of an eagle in the temple that he was rebuilding, the Jewish temple. He put a Roman eagle in the Jewish temple because he was ingratiating himself to the Roman power. And this turned out to his advantage. So it says he will be successful, and he was, until the time of wrath is completed. And that's what this passage, this whole Daniel 10 through 12 is about, the time of wrath. We'll get more into that when we get to chapter 12. Going to verse 37, he will show no regard for the gods or the God of his fathers. We talked about that last time. which translation is it, God or gods of his fathers, or for the one desired by women, nor will he regard any god, but will exalt himself above them all. We talked a little bit about him exalting himself above them all already. The one desired by women is generally thought to be the Messiah, and this is because of Haggai 2:7, where the Messiah is called the desire of nations, although some translations have the treasures or the wealth of nations in Haggai 2:7. But the traditional understanding of that passage has been that what's being spoken of in Haggai is as the desire of nations is the Messiah, and that this passage is linked to the Haggai passage by the word desire. And the desire of women would be the Messiah too, because it was a well-known desire of all Jewish girls to grow up and give birth to the Messiah. And at least faithful Jewish girls would want to grow up and be the one who gave birth to the Messiah. Yeah, I was going to go to another passage and talk about that, but the other passage is really controversial. So we can go from this one, which is difficult, to that other one, which is difficult. Yeah, I'm thinking of Jephthah's daughter. Does anybody know why Jephthah's daughter, that passage is controversial? Okay, well, I think we'll go there.
Remember who Jephthah is.
Yeah, Jephthah was one of the judges. The judges were not exemplary, most of them. Samuel was the last really excellent judge, but in the book of Judges, the best judges are at the beginning and the worst judges are at the end, and Jephthah's near the end. The last judge in the book is Samson. He's the worst judge. If you go to Judges chapter 12, actually Judges chapter 10, that's where Jephthah starts. Chapter 10. So he gets almost 3 chapters. Jephthah does. He gets a quite long time. We're not going to do the whole thing, and I did do a study on this life of Jephthah and did a paper on it. If anybody's interested in it for more information, but Jephthah was one of the last of the judges, and he did this thing. I'm looking exactly for it, where he made a promise to God. He said, "If you give me victory over my enemies, I will sacrifice to you as a burnt offering the first thing that comes out of my house when I return." Does anybody remember this?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. What was the first thing to come out the door?
His daughter.
His daughter.
Ooh.
And so, let me see. I think it's in chapter 10. Let me look here.
I don't think it's 10. No.
You don't think it's 10? I think it's 11.
Well, I'm there and I don't
No.
see anything about Jephthah.
It's 11. You know,
About
Jephthah
11.
starts in verse
Yeah.
6. Jephthah starts in verse 6, but yeah, maybe 11. Let's see. Oh, yeah, there it is. So, verse 29. And then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah. He crossed Gilead and Manasseh, passed through Mizpah of Gilead, and from there he advanced against the Ammonites. And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord, "If you give the Amorites into my hands, whatever comes out the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph from the Ammonites will be the Lord's, and I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering." Okay, don't make rash vows. Okay, this is one of the there's several reasons why he didn't have to keep this vow, but he goes ahead and keeps it. His daughter comes out the door. We'll read it. Verse 32, then Jephthah went over to fight the Amorites, and the Lord gave them into his hands. He devastated 20 towns from Aroer to the vicinity of Minnith, as far as Abel Kiramim. Thus Judah subdued Ammon. When Jephthah returned to his home in Mizpah, who should come out to meet him but his daughter, dancing to the sound of tambourines? She was an only child. Except for her, he had neither son nor daughter. When he saw her, he tore his clothes and cried, "O my daughter, you have made me miserable and wretched, because I have made a vow to the Lord that I cannot break." "My father," she replied, "you have given your word to the Lord. Do to me just as you promised, now that the Lord has avenged you of your enemies, the Ammonites. But grant me this one request," she said. "Give me 2 months to roam the hills and weep with my friends, because I will never marry." The explanation for verse 37 generally is she was sad because she would never marry, and so she had no possibility of bearing the Messiah. That is, so this is how the two passages are linked there. That that the whole thing that she's mourning is she will never marry and thus have no children, thus cannot bear the Messiah. And that was a desire of all the Jewish women, Jewish young women. So, not to leave this story hanging, goes on and says, verse 38, "You may go," he said, and he let her go for 2 months. She and the girls went into the hills and wept because she would never marry. After the 2 months, she returned to her father, and he did to her as he had vowed, and she was a virgin. And then talks about a custom of mourning. Or yes, Mom.
How does the timing of this book of Judges fit? Or not this book, but how does the timing of this daughter fit with the writing of the book of Isaiah, which says a virgin shall conceive and bear a
Right.
son?
Yeah, so Isaiah would be later by a couple of hundred years. So
Okay.
Judges is finished. I don't remember the exact dates, but what happens after Judges? It's like Samuel. So Samuel's about 900 BC. So Judges is going to finish around 900, and Samuel's the last of the judges. And then you have the monarchy. Then you have the division of the kingdom, and then you have right around the fall of Samaria, about 722. Isaiah's ministry starts right before that, so about 740. So we've got 200 years between the two. So this passage doesn't seem to me to be very controversial when I read Jephthah, the story of Jephthah. He makes a vow. His daughter, noble and faithful, says, "Keep your vow to the Lord," and he offers her as a burnt offering, which is horrendous. And there's no evaluation of the incident at all in the text. You have to evaluate it based on other parts of Scripture. And if you look at just the parts of Scripture that Jephthah would have had available to him, so the books of Moses, you see that he has not made a vow that he needs to keep. So he's ignorant. He has a good heart. He wants to serve the Lord, and he's heard making vows are good, and he makes a vow, but he is ignorant of what a legal binding vow is, and so he makes a hasty vow and say, "Yes, Mom."
Okay, so explain what Moses said about a legal binding vow.
Well, you can't offer people as burnt offerings. That would be Moses said, you can't offer people as burnt offerings. You shouldn't offer a hasty vow. Hasty vows don't need to be so there was no prohibition, obviously, against a vow against burnt offerings, but there is a vow involving persons, and you can't violate the law and when you make a vow involving persons or any other vow. And it would be illegal to offer any person as a burnt offering. And we have laws against that. So I don't remember.
It's a child sacrifice.
Yeah, it's a child sacrifice.
That's exactly what it is. And we see many places where God abhorred nations whose religion demanded human sacrifice.
Right. Yes, Mom.
So it would be a situation where in our modern day, somebody would say, "I swear to God, I'm going to kill you." And the law says, "Oh, no, you're not."
Right. It would be similar to that. So I think the lesson, the main lesson in Jephthah here in this story is that why would Jephthah make such a vow? And the answer would be because it was commonplace for pagan generals when they went into war to make a vow, a promise to the god that they were serving to do something, build a temple, make a sacrifice, donate the treasure, whatever it was. And that this is, like I said, it's a pagan practice. And Jephthah doesn't see anything wrong with that because although he is a believer in the one true God, he does not possess himself a copy of the scriptures, and the priesthood has fallen into disrepute, which is why we have judges. And there's actually a copy of the scriptures close by physically to Jephthah's location, but it's not being preached. And so he is following what he thinks is the right thing to do by looking at the culture. And of course, the lesson there is we're not to be conformed to the image of the culture, right? But the image of the Lord. And so we don't want to be doing these religious observances that the culture is doing. We want to find out what it is we're supposed to be doing. And
One of those places where, no one, we can't understand God's plan or his thinking for this. But nonetheless, we ponder a question: why did the Lord give him victory in that battle when he knew what Jephthah was going to do when he went home?
right. Well, one of the reasons is so that we could have a record of it here, and it would be a challenging passage for us to ponder.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's a terrible thing. And the only controversy is, I think, the controversy is Jephthah is named as a hero of faith in Hebrews 11. Yeah, just like Rahab. So you have a problem with Rahab, she lied. You have a problem with Jephthah. You got a problem with Abraham, he lied. All these things, right? And they're in the hero of faith catalog in chapter 11. And so many commentators have come back to this passage here in Judges and said, well, he couldn't possibly have offered his daughter as a burnt offering. What this actually means is that he dedicated her to the service in the tabernacle. It's like, no, it says burnt offering. It says he did what he promised to do. I have no problem with saints sinning. Everybody sins. Everybody in the catalog of the people of the saints of God, they all sin terribly. And I read the text and I go, well, that's what he did. And it's terrible. It's a terrible thing that he did that. And that isn't the thing he's being commended for. He's being commended for his faith to the Lord. Even this misguided experience. When you read the whole account of Jephthah, he expresses faith in the Lord over and over again. And he even says in earlier, which we haven't read, but he has said, the battle, if the battle is won, it is the Lord's doing. Yeah, he says, this is the Lord that wins this battle, not me. Becky, go ahead.
So one of the big steps of faith that he missed was he was given a bonus of 2 months where he could have studied on his own, gone to the priests,
Gone to Shiloh, right? Yeah.
gone, found out whether or not he actually was obligated to sacrifice his daughter, and learned that it was not. But he chose to rely on his own understanding, and he had a 2-month gift to find that out.
Yeah, true. Had not thought of it that way before. That's a good point. Go ahead, Mom.
So he is not being commended in Hebrews 11 for the fact that he kept his vow to the Lord.
Right.
He's being commended for the rest of his life where he proved his faith in God.
Right.
And yet, this is the thing we remember.
Yeah. Yeah. So when if you take the time to read the other couple of chapters about Jephthah, he doesn't shine like a great example of faithfulness like you might get with, like it's not like Paul or something like that. But it is obvious that he knows the Lord and that he credits the Lord with every good thing in his life and with the victory in all of his endeavors. And when he has there's a series of letters that he sends to one of the kings who are wanting to attack Israel. And his responses show his understanding of Israelite history, not just the facts of the history, but from a theological perspective. God gave us that land. Why are you fighting me? Your gods couldn't keep the land. Our God gave us the land. And he's basically mocking. so you can see examples of his faith, but his faith was uninformed in a lot of places. And well, part of it is his responsibility. Part of it is the way that it's a commentary on the priesthood. Also, no teaching of the word, ignorant people, and ignorant people are going to try to do the best they can by looking at the examples around them, and none of the examples are good. So, yeah. So, I your point is really good, Becky. I think if he was troubled by it, he should have went and investigated. Perhaps he wasn't troubled by it because he had lived it as a military commander in that environment for a while, and that's just what military commanders did. But anyway, so the connection, that the reason I went here, and this is way less controversy than Daniel 11:36. The reason I went here was just to show an illustration of a standard. This is the standard explanation of the daughter saying, she's mourning because she's never going to marry. And the common explanation again is that Jewish girls we're hoping that they would bear the Messiah. And so this is what she's mourning. And so even that shows faith, right, on the part of his family. So anyway, it's a disturbing story, but a good story. It's got a lot in there that's worth thinking about. But let's get back to Daniel 11. So there you go. You had the extra bonus difficult passage. Daniel 11, 38. Instead of them, he will honor a God of fortresses, a God unknown to his fathers. He will honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. So if we look at the handout that I sent out, the longer one, the one we've been working on, and we go to page 6. Let's see. Yeah, chapter 6, I'm sorry, page 6, verse 1138 at the bottom of the page, about this verse, the honoring the God of fortresses. This is from the Jewish Virtual Library, who does not think that Herod, they're not even addressing Herod in any relation to Daniel 11. The vast majority of popular tourist sites in present-day Israel were originally built by Herod. Herod was security conscious. He built fortresses throughout the land just in case he should ever need sanctuary. These included Sebaste in the hills of Ephraim, the central region of Israel, Herodium just east of Bethlehem, and Jericho. Herod protected the Temple Mount with a large military fortress called Antonia, honoring Mark Antony. Mark Antony, the name of the biblical god, right? Now, this is Antony of Antony and Cleopatra. Antony was, at the time that Herod built the temple, one of the 3 leaders of Rome. You remember, before Julius Caesar became the Caesar, or maybe it was after the death of Julius Caesar. This is what happened. After the death of Julius Caesar, there was a Roman triumvirate. Triumvirate, weird word, means 3 people in charge. And it was Mark Antony, Octavius, who became Caesar Augustus after the triumvirate imploded, and a third gentleman, I can't remember his name. But at this time, Mark Antony was one of the 3 leaders of the Roman Empire. And so he's building fortresses honoring the Romans. He protected the western entrance of Jerusalem, and incidentally, his via is situated there, with a huge tri-towered fortress called the Citadel. The Citadel loomed over the wealthy part of town called the Upper City. Herod's most famous fortress was Masada. Herod's projects were built through the use of thousands of Jews as forced laborers moving enormous blocks of limestone. Many of these blocks weighed more than 10 tons. Because of his despotic actions, the Jews despised and feared Herod. Even projects that he commissioned to endear him to the people failed to change their hatred for him. Herod continued to build. In honor of Octavian, Augustus Caesar, Herod took the ancient port city of Straton's Tower just south of Haifa and renamed it Caesarea. Then he created a deep seaport, surrounded the city with a wall, and constructed an amphitheater. To supply the port with ample water, Herod built another enormous aqueduct. Although Herod was a terrible tyrant, his buildings and fortresses remain awesome architectural achievements even today. That's a nod to tourism and economic boom. We hated Herod, but he still brings in tourists, so I guess it's okay. Anyway, Herod. I just picked this one because I thought it was ironic about the tourism, but you can read any summary of Herod's life, and as I said last time, one of the things they focus on is that he's always continually building fortresses and dedicating them to the Romans. The Roman emperors called themselves gods, and so he is dedicating the fortresses to foreign gods. When he names Caesarea, he's dedicating it to Caesar, the foreign god. And so he fulfills this passage pretty clearly and easily. He fulfills just as he fulfills the other one, or at least it looks like to me that he's fulfilling that. 38, 39. He will attack the mightiest fortresses with the help of a foreign god. Rome will help him and will greatly honor those who acknowledge him. He will make them rulers over many people and will distribute the land at a price. Those who ingratiated themselves to Herod, or whom Herod received favors from, Herod would in return give them land and charge over people and things like that. Same thing that all political leaders have done throughout history. That's nothing unusual there. So I think that this passage 36 to 39 fits Herod well, and this is the controversial passage. Who is this passage about? 36 to 39. And just to review the choices again, you have choices. You have options that would be within the same time period as the chronology that we've been following. So the very next thing. So some interpreters try to say this is about one of the Caesars, usually Augustus, and that's helped by the next section that we're just going to look at, but it doesn't really fit these verses 36 to 39. And then other people have thought perhaps this is still about Antiochus, because the account leading up to verse 35 has already spent 15 verses on Antiochus IV, and he hasn't died or anything like that, but we have had the defeat of his armies in the Maccabean period. But they wrongly assume, I think, that this section is supposed to be about the Syrian kings, but the prophecy is about what happens to the Jewish people. So when Antiochus leaves the scene, nobody cares about what happens when he dies. He is not intersecting with Judea anymore, so he's off of the scene. And so what happens next then is there's a new, it's going to be talking about the Roman power and the Herods, basically, who were the face of Rome. Herod was appointed by Rome. So we get Herod here, and then we're going to have something about Augustus, which, as I said, kind of seems to support the case that maybe verses 36 to 39 are about Augustus. And then it's going to return back to Herod before we get to the end of this chapter. The other option is that when you get to verse 36, it's not in chronological order anymore, not close chronological order, in that somehow this skips ahead thousands of years to the future Antichrist. Now, the reason that move is made, there's two of them, is that generally it comes about this way. The last 15 verses were about Antiochus IV. These verses don't seem to be, they should be about Antiochus IV, but it doesn't fit his life. But this description of whoever this person is sounds very much like some of the descriptions that Paul uses about a future Antichrist type person. And so this must be that person. And so we're going to skip ahead that way. So that's how they get there. And as I've said, I think that overlooks what the prophecy is about and the time span of the prophecy. The time span of the prophecy is given again in chapter 12, verse 7. Daniel asks in verse 6, how long will it be before these astonishing things are fulfilled? So he's asking, when is the end point? How long until the end of this? The man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the river lifted his right hand and his left hand toward heaven. And I heard him swear by him who lives forever, saying, it will be for a time, times, and half a time, when the power of the holy people has been finally broken, all these things will be completed. So if we're talking about what happens to the Jewish people all the way up until the time that their power is broken, the natural understanding of that, and we're talking about them in the latter days, the post-exilic period prior to the prior to the establishment of the Messianic kingdom, then we're talking about that period of time that leads us into the first century, not into the final century of human history. So that, for those reasons, I don't think we're talking about a final Antichrist here. I think we're talking about somebody contemporary with the parameters of the prophecy.
It would be so out of context.
It
I
would
think
be.
say it's the Antichrist because we're talking about we're talking about future history or prophecy in chronological order, and then in verse 36 to 39, he would be jumping ahead and talking about something that's thousands of years in the future, and then in verse 40, come back to where he left off.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. I mean, and I think actually when they jump ahead the 2,000 years, they never return. They never come back. They just go ahead 2,000 years and stay there. So from 1136 through the end of chapter 12 would be seen as being all in the future. And we'll look at some verses later which might help that case. I looked at one last week. In fact, I think this is the main one that might be about the general resurrection. If you think it's about the general resurrection, then you do sometime get to the late future. And so it brings some credibility to a move at verse 36 if that's the final judgment. But before we get there, we have to get through verses 40 through 45. I think we can do that before we end today, and then we'll be in chapter 12 for next week. So I think we've been talking about Herod, whoever the king is of 1136, we've been talking about all the way through verse 39. And now we're going to talk again about the king of the south and the king of the north. Now this king in 1136 is neither the king of the south nor the north. And we already talked about that. So now we're kind of switching subject. Verse 40, at the time of the end, the king of the south will engage him in battle, and the king of the north will storm out against him with chariots and cavalry and a great fleet of ships. He will invade many countries and sweep through them like a flood. He will also invade the beautiful land. Many countries will fall, but Edom, Moab, and the leaders of Ammon will be delivered from his hand. He will extend his power over many countries. Egypt will not escape. He will gain control of the treasures of gold and silver and all the riches of Egypt, with the Libyans and Nubians in submission. I'm going to stop right there. So, again, everything after 1136 is highly discussed, and lots of different viewpoints on it, all along the lines I've already outlined. So either this is about, a future Antichrist, or it's not. And either it's about Herod or it's not. Or
Well, how could it be a future Antichrist when now they are kind of continuing on with this sort of battle between the previously mentioned kings of the south and the kings of the north?
Perceptive question. And also, countries here that are listed were contemporary. These are not all contemporary countries in our day. So these are ancient
Gonna-
countries.
Have the return of Edom and Moab.
Yeah, you have not only the return of Israel, but all of their contemporaries, right?
And when they
So-
say at the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him. Who's him?
right. So this is the way. So I have a real just brief way to explain it, but I also have in the notes a longer explanation if you care to read that. And then one of the books I sent you was by James Farkenhausen, something like that. Don't know how to say his last name. But it's over 200 pages just explaining Daniel's last prophecy, chapters 10 through 12. It's probably the most detailed. And he's explaining it from using quotations from contemporary history. So from Josephus, first century Jewish historian, and from the lives of the Caesars by Suetonius and by the writings of Pliny and, first, second century materials he's taking and quoting and putting them in there and say, look, this is what's happening by historians of that day, using their words. So that explanation that he would use and that is followed by pretty much everybody that I have encountered that believes Herod is being spoken of in the earlier verses, what they think is happening here in verses 40 through 43 are the Battle of Actium, which was between the combined forces of Mark Antony, who is, as I mentioned, Roman, but at this time he's allied with Cleopatra, who's Syrian, but she's now the queen of Egypt. So we got all kinds of, so she's Egypt. So Mark Antony had a falling out with Caesar Augustus, or with Augustus. He wasn't the Caesar then, with Octavian, who became Caesar Augustus. And so what happened was each of the three in the triumvirate, the head of Rome, they got themselves armies and tried to see which one of them would come out on top and be the leader. And so Mark Antony allies himself with Egypt, with Cleopatra. At the end of this, when Rome finally declares war on the combined forces of Mark Antony and Cleopatra, Augustus only declares war against Cleopatra because he doesn't want to be seen as somebody who's dividing the empire. He doesn't want to be seen as fighting against another Roman, even though it was basically Antony's armies under Cleopatra and Antony's leadership that he was fighting. It's pretty interesting. So the combined forces of Mark Antony and Cleopatra against Octavius, who's the Roman, and what he's doing now is he's controlling what was formerly Syria. So he is the king of the north, and the king of the south would be Cleopatra, allied with Antony. And this battle was fought on September 2nd, 31 BC. And so it says, I'll just read it and put in their names. At the time of the end, the king of the south, Mark Antony and Cleopatra, shall attack him, but the king of the north, Octavius, the future Caesar Augustus, shall rush upon him like a whirlwind with chariots and horsemen and with many ships. So you should note that no infantry is mentioned here. Both sides had a very large infantry. And in the Battle of Actium, it was a sea battle. And so the infantry was not used, even though this battle could have easily been fought with infantry. Mark Antony makes a foolish decision to fight the battle at sea, and he ends up losing. So the infantry is not mentioned here. And he shall come into the countries and shall overflow and pass through. And this is just talking about military movements through countries to get to the place of battle. He shall come into the glorious land. He shall cross over through Judea, through Israel. Tens of thousands shall fall, but these shall be delivered out of his hand. Edom and Moab and the main part of the Ammonites. So he passes through in pursuit. Octavius passes through Israel, killing and fighting battles as he goes. But he doesn't pass through the lands of Edom, Moab, and the main part of the Ammonites. And so they're spared. And that's what the passage says. He shall stretch out his hands, verse 42, against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. This is where Cleopatra is. He's going to Egypt. He shall become ruler of the treasures of gold and of silver and of all the precious things of Egypt. And the Libyans and the Cushites shall follow in his train. When Octavius won his victory over Antony and Cleopatra, he plundered Egypt. He took all of its treasures out of Egypt. And his general, a guy named Cornelius Balbus, he later took Libya and Ethiopia and plundered their treasures and brought them back to Rome. And so we have here kind of a parenthetical remark about what's happening. Again, it's about what's happening in the Holy Land, and what's happening is armies are going to and fro and passing back and forth in the Holy Land during this period of time. And in fact, Herod was involved in this battle. Herod was initially on the side of Antony and Cleopatra with his army, and then he switched sides when he saw Octavian was winning. And he went to Rome, and he pledged that he would be Rome's man in Judea if they would just make him king. And they did. Made him king of Judea in 63. So this still is part of a continuation of the Herod story for anybody who knows the history, but it's a parentheses to show again what's happening in the land to the Jewish people. And now we're done with that parentheses and we get back to Herod in verse 44. Yes, Mom.
It's maybe a minor point, but I want to question something you said and ask you to explain it.
Yeah, hopefully I might have misspoken, and that'll be also helpful.
I don't know. You had quite an explanation for your mistakenness.
Okay.
Or misspokenness. Verse 40.
Yeah.
King of the North stormed out against him with chariots and cavalry and a great fleet of ships. And you said there's no mention here of infantry. Well, what's the cavalry? And chariots are on land. This isn't a sea battle.
Right. So it ends up being a sea battle.
Okay.
And with many ships.
According to history, or?
Well, according to history, right? According to history, it ends up being a sea battle. And infantry is, so chariots, infantry is the marching men, not the horsemen. That's the cavalry, like you said.
Oh, the horseman is the cavalry?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you have chariots. So anything
Right.
mobile
With
is
horses.
not infantry. Infantry is the foot soldiers. Yeah. Phew. Let me real quickly just mention some
Well,
things.
notice I said I wanted to question and I didn't want to challenge it.
Oh,
So,
okay. All right. Good catch. Good catch. So moving to verse 44, unless there's another question, challenge, or complaint, use all the C words. Okay, we're good. But news from the east and the north shall alarm him, and he shall go out with great fury to destroy and devote many to destruction. And he shall pitch his palatial tents between the sea and the glorious holy mountain, yet he shall come to his end with none to help him. Okay, so among the commentators who follow the Herod is being spoken of in verse 1136, the explanation for these two verses goes like this. We're now talking about Herod again. News from the east and the north alarms him, and he goes out with great fury to devote many to destruction. Can you remember any news from the east that Herod may have received that made him be a little upset? Yeah.
there was a king born.
There's a king born, and he went out with great fury to devote many to destruction, right? What was the news from the north? Well, the news from the north was at this very same time, right around the very same time that the Magi show up, Herod learns that one of his sons, I don't remember his name, one of his sons is planning to take over, either some kind of conspiracy to take over for Herod. And Herod has he has one reaction to anybody who threatens his power. That's right. Kill the son. Now, the son and everybody allied with him, right? Now, this son, just to show you what the Herod family was like, there were three sons that were involved here. Herod was going to make two of the sons his successors, and this other son who was plotting against him, who Herod didn't know was plotting against him. Herod wasn't going to make him his successor. So that son 3, sends letters to Herod saying, "Oh, your 2 favorite sons, they're speaking bad about you to Octavius. They're saying bad things to the Caesar about you." So Herod had those 2 sons killed, just on a rumor. And then later on, he hears son number 3 is plotting against you. That happened to be true. Son number 3 was plotting against him, and Herod kills him and everybody around him, right? And then Herod, just for good measure, about at this time also, there was something else happening in Judea. There were about a handful of priests, 70 or 80 priests, who thought it was probably a good idea to take that golden eagle out of the temple. And so they took that golden eagle out of the temple. And Herod said, "I'm about to die, but catch all those guys and lock them in the hippodrome. And when I die, kill them all." And thankfully, his the people that he left in charge of that caught the priests, put him in the hippodrome. Herod died, and then they said, "Nah, we're not going to kill these guys," and they let him go. But Herod's vicious, terrible person. So he hears this news from the east, news from the north. He reacts in fury, has many people killed. Verse 45, he shall pitch his palatial tents between the sea and the glorious holy mountain. He had palaces in several places. One of them was between the Mediterranean Sea and Mount Zion. That's what's thought to be talking of here. Yet he shall come to his end with none to help him. The death of Herod, we'll read it. We have 1 minute, but it's going to take a little longer, but oh well. We're on page, where are we? Oh, page 8 at the top. He will come to his end with no one to help him. This is from that book by Farquharson. This part of the prediction obviously implies that in his last hours the king would apply for deliverance or remedy from some affliction or disease, but would receive none. And how literally was this fulfilled in the end of Herod the Great? History has preserved to us few such circumstantial accounts of the last days of remarkable men as that which Josephus has transmitted to us of his, but we deem it too long for insertion here. It exhibits the most fearful picture to be found anywhere of the end of an impenitent sinner, who, having cast out of his heart all fear of God and all feeling of responsibility to him, had equally lost all sense of duty to man, and after committing innumerable crimes and cruelties, in which he spared not those connected with him by the dearest and tenderest ties, any more than others, was at last seized in his old age with a painful and loathsome disease, and suffering alike from that and from the pangs of guilty fear, yet continued in a course of extreme wickedness to his last hour, seeking no remedy for his evil passions, but exhausting all the resources of the physician's skill to mitigate his body's distemper and lengthen out his wretched life. We refer to Josephus for an account of the remedies and expedients to which he had of which recourse by the advice of his physicians. All failed to relieve or arrest the disease which cut him off while he was meditating new crimes of matchless cruelty.
You mentioned his this trouble that he had with his 3 sons. One of them wanted to usurp the power, and another one, or someone said, your other sons are plotting against you. Where did Herod Antipas fit into those? Which one of the 3?
That's the 3rd son. He's the 3rd son, Herod Antipas. He's the one that was, at the end, was conspiring against Herod from Rome, and Herod had him killed. Yeah.
I think I've seen that depicted too. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one. So this is how the Herod explanation, what I've outlined is the basics of the Herod explanation. This is Herod 36 to 39. This is the Battle of Actium. Parenthetical 40 to 43. 44 and 45 goes back to Herod. talks about his last days, talks about the Magi, the conspiracies against Herod, his reactions to them, his cruelty, again brought up, and then his death with no one to help him. So that would bring us up now to really close to the 1st century. Actually, Herod dies in 4 BC. So we're now real close to the 1st century when we get to chapter 12, which is just a continuation of the same prophecy. So we will pick that up on Tuesday. And
Chuck,
yeah,
was this Herod the one that asked for the killing of all the male babies?
it is.
Okay, so
Yeah.
Christ was born when he was alive.
Yeah, Christ was born
Okay.
between 6 and 4 BC.
Okay,
And so the news from the east gets us right to that, obviously right there. And then Herod's death is shortly after that.
okay.
And then we have all the other Herods in the New Testament who, the only one that comes out, the best looking Herod in the New Testament is Philip, right? Whose wife defects to, right? Don, what was it? It was one of the Herods was sleeping with his brother's wife.
Nice bunch of family.
And the one whose wife was being unfaithful to him, he's the only one who doesn't look vicious.
And this was during John the Baptist.
Yeah, John the Baptist, right? That was
Yeah.
John the Baptist was
The one who warned him.
yeah. So all the Herods they just look terrible. And you have the Herod in the book of Acts that he dies on the spot and then is eaten by worms because he says he's greater than the great God, and just got all kinds of stuff. But the backstory on the Herods is really interesting. And
So you're talking about Herod Antipas, who married his brother's wife or something.
yeah, right.
Yeah, I can't remember her name, but yeah, the Herods. They fit the category of what some people might call, they were just 10 miles of bad road.
That's them.
And of course,
Yeah.
another thing that comes to mind is that it'd be very easy to depict Herod the Great as a current day Antichrist.
Oh yeah, easy. Actually, when I was reading about Herod the Great, I thought this sounds like Henry the Great.
You mean Henry VIII?
Henry VIII, yeah, King Henry,
Yeah.
great Henry, really similar to that
Hmm.
that type of temperament, and power, and just suspicion. He was always
Lack of
suspicious.
morality.
Yeah, all kinds of things. So, yeah, you see people like this. I like what the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia said. Herod was the Jewish Nero, and I thought, yeah,
That fits.
that fits. Give people all that much power, and if they have no moral compass, the results are disastrous. So anyway, I for my part, I think the Herod explanation is a good one. There are some sticking points which are difficult for me, but I think the difficulties are less than with any other view. The way that it switched back and forth there between verses, say 39 and 44, so switches subjects is a little difficult for me, but I see that also characteristic in other prophecies. But I also think, as I said, that the problems inherent with the other views are bigger. So again, just like when we look at eschatology and we try to decide on a particular view that we favor, it isn't the one that explains everything, but it's the one, I think, it's all the boats have holes. It's the boat with the least holes or the least critical holes that you want to get into, and it might make it all the way across, but you'll be a little wet when you get there. So,
Salome. That's who
Salome was the daughter, right? The daughter. Yeah.
Chuck, Could you maybe send a message about what those books were again that was talking about this that you mentioned?
Yes, I'll send it out. Send it out
Thanks.
again. Yeah, you should download them and then you'll have them.
Yeah.
There's some good ones there. Okay. Thank you for your attention today. It's a difficult passage to explain it because it's so complex. I hope that was more helpful. And if you need a refresher, I think the notes will help out that I sent.
And you're gracious enough to say it's either Herod or somebody else.
Yeah, it's Herod or not. Herod seems the best candidate to me, but
Yeah.
that's just me. So,
I just can't. One I can't see in any scenario is that this king is jumping forward thousands of years, only to return in verse 40.
yeah. All right.